My name is Claire Donovan. I am 29 years old, and I work as a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm in Austin, Texas, where I spend my days making sure buildings do not fall down, while quietly watching my own family do exactly that. I want to tell you about the day I graduated with my master's degree, EFE. Not because it was the proudest moment of my life, though it should have been. I want to tell you about it because it was the day my brother chose that room, that stage, that crowd of people who had come to celebrate me, to announce his engagement. And I want to tell you what happened after, because what came after is the part nobody in my family saw coming. But before I get to that, let me send you something first. Where are you watching this right now? Are you at home, maybe on a couch that took you longer to afford than you'd like to admit? Are you on a lunch break, eat me, stealing 10 quiet minutes away from a job that asks more than it gives? Because I want to know how far this story is going to travel before I finish telling it. Drop your city in the comments. I'll be reading. Now let me take you back. I started my undergraduate degree at 18 with a partial academic scholarship, 2 part-time jobs, and a suitcase my mother had packed with hand-me-down linens, and a card that said, "We are so proud of you." I kept that card for 3 years. Then I found out my parents had taken out a home equity line of credit, not to help with my tuition, not to cover my housing, but to pay for my brother Daniel's private music studio, his first 2 recording sessions, and a used van he needed to drive his band to weekend gigs in cities that always seemed to be just far enough away to require hotel rooms. I was not angry when I found out. I was 21, and I had already learned that being angry at the way my family distributed love was like being angry at weather. It happened, it was unequal, and nothing I said would change the forecast, so I worked harder. I applied for every grant I could find. I took on tutoring clients at 11 at night. I graduated on time, debt-free, and got accepted into a fully funded master's program in structural engineering at the University of Texas, Cable. My parents cried when I told them. My mother said she always knew I would make something of myself. My father said I had gotten the discipline gene. Daniel was there too, sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. He looked up long enough to say, "Nice job, Clary," then went back to his screen, "Nice job." He had been saying things like that my whole life, small sentences that carried just enough warmth to avoid being called cold. Daniel was the kind of person who made absence feel like a style choice instead of a pattern. He showed up at birthdays 90 minutes as late and called it fashionable. He forgot anniversaries but remembered to post something online the following day with a caption about how love does not need a calendar. He borrowed things and returned them in worse condition with a smile that said gratitude was implied even when it was never spoken. And everyone let him. Because Daniel was charming in the way that certain people are charming, not genuinely, but convincingly. He had a voice that made rooms lean toward him. He had a laugh that made criticism feel like overreaction. He had our parents convinced that his life was always one break away from becoming the story they could tell at dinner parties. I spent 6 years becoming the story nobody told at dinner parties. My master's program was difficult in the specific way that good things usually are. The work was dense, the hours were long, and the rewards were slow. I studied buildings that had survived earthquakes, bridges that held under conditions they were never designed for, foundations that outlasted the architects who drew them. I found something satisfying in that kind of permanence. In a family where nothing felt stable, learning to build things that lasted felt like a private act of defiance. During those 2 years, Daniel did not finish a single album. He left the band he had started, then started another, then left that one too when the other members got real jobs and stopped being available on short notice. He moved back into my parents' house at 27 and paid nothing toward the mortgage, to me. My parents told me he was going through a creative transition. I told myself that was their choice to make. What I did not know was that while I was finishing my thesis on load distribution in asymmetric structures, Ethan, Daniel had met a woman named Priya at a bar trivia night. Proposed to her 4 months later using a ring my mother had quietly given him from her jewelry box, Giva's, and spent the next 6 weeks planning the most important announcement of his life, without once considering when it should happen. I found out about Priya the way I found out about most things in my family. Late, by accident, and with the feeling that everyone else had been standing in a room I was never invited into. My graduation ceremony was held on a Saturday afternoon in May. The engineering college auditorium held around 600 people. My department had arranged a small reception in the courtyard after the ceremony with catered food, a string quartet, Hibali, and tables set with white cloths and centerpieces made of eucalyptus and ivory flowers. My advisor had written something in the program about students who represented the best of what the discipline could produce. Gibi. She had not mentioned me by name, but she told me privately that the paragraph was mine. My parents came. My aunt Carol came. 3 of my closest friends from the program came with their families. Daniel came, 18. Which surprised me, because Daniel rarely came to anything that did not have him at the center of it. I should have read that as a warning. I walked across that stage in a gown that was slightly too long and shoes that were slightly too tight. And when they called my name, I heard my mother make the sound she only made when she was genuinely moved. A small, sharp inhale, followed by a long exhale. Like she was breathing out years of worry. My father stood up. My Aunt Carol put 2 fingers in her mouth and whistled so loudly that the woman beside her flinched. Eva. My friends cheered. For about 4 minutes, the room was entirely mine. Then came the reception. We were standing in the courtyard, plates in hand, sun low and golden behind the trees. 18. My advisor was telling a story about the first time she had seen my thesis draft, and the note she had written in the margin, which simply said, "Keep going." My mother was listening with the expression she wore. At events she found slightly above her comfort level, engaged but careful, like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing and sounding ordinary. Giebel. Daniel set his plate down on the nearest table, put 2 fingers in his mouth the way my aunt had, and whistled. Everyone turned. He was grinning. That wide, camera-ready grin that belonged on someone who had rehearsed the moment. He said, "I hope nobody minds if I steal 1 quick second from my brilliant sister." And then he held out his hand to Priya, Givlu, who walked toward him from somewhere near the drinks table, looking nervous and beautiful, and clearly uncertain about the timing even if she loved the man. He pulled out the ring. He got down on one knee. Gibitha. He said her name like it was the opening line of a song he had been writing for years. She said yes. The courtyard erupted. People who had come to celebrate my degree were suddenly applauding an engagement. Gabalaman. My advisor's half-finished story about my thesis dissolved into the noise. My Aunt Carol, who had whistled for me 4 minutes earlier, pressed both hands to her face and teared up for him. Gili. My father shook Daniel's hand with both of his. My mother pulled Priya into a hug that lasted so long it became the photograph. I stood with my plate and watched the room reorganize itself around my brother, Gibagal. I did not make a scene, that was never my way. I smiled when people glanced at me. I said the ring was beautiful because it was. I congratulated Priya, who whispered, I told him to wait, which I appreciated more than she knew. I moved to the edge of the courtyard and stood near a eucalyptus centerpiece, and reminded myself that I had built a career out of learning how structures survive pressure they were not designed to absorb. I survived the reception. I went home that night, took off the too tight shoes, sat at my kitchen table, and allowed myself 1 hour to feel exactly how I felt. Small. Edited out. Can be. Present in the room but absent from the story. Then the hour ended and I made tea and started thinking, because here is what I knew that my family did not. 3 weeks before my graduation, EPZ, a senior partner at my firm had approved my name on a structural certification that made me the sole licensed signatory on a commercial development project in downtown Austin. The project had a budget of $3 million. My name was on the permit. My name was on the insurance documents. My name was on a plaque that would eventually be installed in the lobby of a building that would outlast every person in that courtyard. Keen. And I knew something else. Daniel had called me the week before graduation. Not to ask about my ceremony, not to wish me well. He had called because his music career had officially stalled. His savings were gone. His rent at my parents' house had started creating friction. And he had a new plan. He wanted to open a small recording studio. Not just a room with equipment, but a proper space, soundproofed, commercially zoned, with a booking system and session packages for independent artists. He had priced it out. He needed $40,000 to get started. He wanted to know if I would invest. I had said I would think about it. That was not a yes. But Daniel had a talent for converting maybe into yes in the space between conversations. He had already told our parents I was on board. My father brought it up at dinner 2 days later as a done deal. Your sister is going to help Daniel get the studio started. Great timing with her new salary. I had sat there and said nothing because I was still deciding, still weighing whether this was help or habit. Whether $40,000 would become a foundation or another borrowed van that came back with a dented bumper and a thank you that arrived a week late. By the night of my graduation, I had made my decision. But I wanted to make it in the right room. My parents invited everyone back to their house the following Sunday for a combined celebration, my graduation and Daniel's engagement. My mother cooked for 2 days. My father rented extra chairs. Priya's family came, polite and warm, and clearly still figuring out what they had stepped into. My Aunt Carol brought a sheet cake with both events written on it in blue frosting. My name was in slightly smaller letters. I noticed. I let it go. We ate. We talked. Daniel sat at the head of the table like a man who had finally earned the seat. Yippies. Priya sat beside him, looking like someone trying very hard to love her new family, almost succeeding. My mother kept touching the engagement ring every time she passed Priya, the way people touch things they are proud of owning. Then my father tapped his glass. He stood up, cleared his throat, and said that he wanted to say a few words about both of his children. He talked about Daniel first. He called him a dreamer in the best sense of the word. He talked about perseverance and passion and the studio plan that would finally give Daniel the platform he deserved. He said he and my mother were proud to have raised a son with the courage to chase what he loved. Then he turned to me. He said I had always been the dependable one, the quiet worker, the one who never needed much, which meant they always knew I would be fine. He said he was proud of the degree, proud of the career, and grateful that I was in a position to help my brother take the next step. Grateful that I was in a position to help my brother. He said it to a room full of people like it was already settled. Like my $40,000 had already been agreed upon, and this dinner was just the part where the family said, "Thank you in public." I looked at Daniel. He was smiling. Not the camera-ready grin from the courtyard. Something quieter, something that understood it had already won. I picked up my glass. I said, "I'd actually love to say something too, if that's okay." My father sat down. The room adjusted. My mother smiled with the specific brightness of a woman who hoped what was coming would be short and sweet. I said, "I am so happy for Daniel and Priya. I mean that. Priya, I think you are genuinely lovely, and I hope what I am about to say doesn't change the way you see this family, only the way you understand it." The room went quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. Priya looked at Daniel. Daniel's smile did not move, but his eyes changed. I said, "I want to talk about the studio investment, since Dad already brought it up in front of everyone. I have been thinking about it since Daniel asked me. I thought about it at my ceremony last week, right after my degree was called, while the room was still applauding. I thought about it while my brother proposed at my graduation reception. which I want to be clear was not something I was told about in advance. A few people shifted in their seats. My Aunt Carol put down her fork. I continued. I have been thinking about what $40,000 means in our family. I have been thinking about where money goes, and who it follows, and what it means when someone is called dependable. So I did something this week. I sat down and I went back through 7 years of records, bank statements, transfer confirmations, emails with subject lines, like just for now and only temporary and will pay you back when things settle. I placed a folder on the table. Not dramatic, not slapped down, just set there the way you set down something that has been heavy for a long time. I said, the total across 7 years is $61,400. Equals sem. Not including the home equity line of credit my parents took out when I was 21, that funded Daniel's studio time and tour van. I did not include that because that money came from this house, not from me directly. But I want the room to understand that this family has been investing in Daniel's dream for a very long time. Just quietly, just from accounts that were not his. My mother whispered my name. I looked at her gently. Mom, I am not angry. I am just finished being the budget line that nobody mentions at the table. My father started to speak. I held up one hand, not sharply, just firmly. I said, I am not going to invest in the studio. That is my decision, and it is final. But I want to tell Daniel something directly. And I want to say it here, because this is the room where he announced his engagement at my graduation. So it feels like the right place to make sure everyone hears clearly. Daniel, I paid for your first 2 semesters of college before you dropped out. I covered the deposit on the first apartment you rented when you moved out. I paid the insurance deductible when your van was damaged after the tour. I sent money home 4 times in 2 years when you were between things, and each time I was told it was temporary. It was never temporary. It was structural. I was a support beam your life was built on top of, and nobody in this room, including you, ever asked whether I was doing okay under the weight. The room was completely silent. I said, I love you. I do. But I am not the bank account attached to your dream. I have my own building to construct, and it has my name on the permit. I picked up my glass, took one sip, and sat back down. For about 10 seconds, nobody moved. Then Priya said, very quietly, Daniel, you told me Claire had agreed. He looked at her. He looked at me. He looked at my father, who was studying the tablecloth. He said, I thought she was going to. Priya said, that is not the same thing. Mother began smoothing the tablecloth, the way she always did when the room was saying something she did not want to hear. My Aunt Carol picked her fork back up and said nothing, which from Carol meant everything. Priya's mother leaned toward her husband, and I caught the edge of what she said. We didn't know about any of this. Daniel finally looked at me. His voice was lower than I had ever heard it. Claire, you didn't have to do it like this. I said, you proposed at my graduation. So I think we are even on public timing. That was the only moment anything close to humor entered the room. One of Priya's cousins made a sound that might have been a laugh before covering it. Daniel did not laugh. He looked at me for a long moment, and I think, for the first time in our adult lives, he was trying to see me instead of looking past me. I did not know what he found. I only knew what I had finally said. The dinner ended early. Priya's family left with the careful politeness of people who had learned something important about a situation they were now permanently part of. My Aunt Carol hugged me at the door and held on for an extra second without saying anything. That silence carried more than most speeches. My parents did not speak to me that night. My father walked me to my car with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the driveway. Before I got in, he said, that was a lot to put on the table. I said, I know. It's been a lot to carry. He had no answer for that. Men like my father rarely did. They were fluent in love as pride and obligations, but the dialect of accountability was a second language they had never been made to practice. I drove home with the windows down and the folder on my passenger seat and the particular quiet that comes after saying the true thing in the room, where it needed to be said. The days after were complicated in the way that honest moments always are. My mother called on a Monday and did not know how to start. She tried 3 different openings. Are you okay? That was a lot to process. Keen. I want you to know we love you. I let her reach for the one that fit. When she landed on the last one, I told her I knew, and that I needed love to look like something I could feel. Teen. Not just something she was certain she was giving, she cried. I let her. I did not rush the silence. My father called 2 days later. He asked if I had the records in front of me. I said yes. He asked me to go through them. He did, line by line, date by date, the way I walked through load. Calculations, at work, patient, precise, without judgment. When I finished, he said, "We took advantage of how quietly you gave." I said, "Yes." He said, "I don't know how to fix 7 years." I said, "You don't fix it, even. You just don't repeat it." Daniel called on a Thursday. I almost did not answer. But I had said everything I needed to say in that dining room, and there was nothing left in me that needed protecting through silence. He said, he and I had a long conversation. I said, "I imagine you did." He said she had asked him to go through everything he had borrowed from me over the years, and to write it down. He had done it. The number he arrived at was close to mine, though he had forgotten a few things, which he admitted without being prompted. He said, "I didn't realize it added up like that." I said, "Things that build slowly usually don't look like much until you see the whole structure." He was quiet. Then he said, "I'm sorry about the graduation. I genuinely thought the celebration was big enough for both of us." I didn't think about what it meant to you. That sentence was not perfect. But it was real. I had learned to value real over perfect a long time ago. I said, "I believe you didn't think. Hindi. That's actually the part I need you to change." He said, "Okay." It was a small word for a large request. But it landed differently than any of his previous sentences because it did not come with a smile attached. Yeah. Priya reached out to me a week later, not through Daniel, but directly. She asked if she could take me to coffee. I said yes. We sat in a place near my office that had high ceilings and loud espresso machines. Evilly. And she told me that she had grown up in a family where financial sacrifice was distributed unevenly, and she had promised herself she would never participate in a dynamic that treated one person as a resource and another as a priority. She said, "I want you to be in our lives. I want us to be actual family. But I need you to know I see the pattern. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't exist." Hinin. I looked at her across the table and felt something I had not expected. Relief at being seen by someone who had just arrived and already understood more than people who had been there for years. I said, "That is more than I expected." She said, "You deserved it at the graduation, and you deserved it a long time before that." We finished our coffee. Eva. We walked out into the Austin afternoon, and for a few minutes, we were just 2 people standing in the sun, deciding whether to keep building something or to let the ground stay cracked. I chose to keep building, in thee. Not because the past was forgiven in the clean way stories sometimes suggest. Not because a dinner table confession erased 7 years of invisible weight. I chose it because I had learned something in all those years of studying structures that was more useful outside a textbook than inside one. The strongest foundations are not the ones that never cracked. They are the ones that were repaired honestly, with the right materials, by people who understood what had failed and why. My family was fractured. That was real. But fractures are not always the end. Sometimes they are the map that shows you exactly where the work needs to happen. 4 months after that dinner, Daniel and Priya set a wedding date. They asked me to be a witness at the signing. Not a bridesmaid, Hebe, not a speech giver, a witness. Priya said she chose the words specifically because she wanted me in the room as someone who had seen everything clearly. I said yes, Hebe nah. My parents paid for their own contribution to the wedding budget and did not ask me for a single dollar. My father made one quiet comment that he was proud of the way I had handled myself. Hibin. My mother said she had not understood until she stood in my apartment one afternoon and noticed there was no record of my life anywhere in their house. No graduation photo on the wall, no degree certificate beside Daniel's band posters, no marker that said a daughter had also done something worth preserving. She said she was going to fix that. I told her frames were on sale at the store, 2 blocks from their house. She laughed. It was the most real laugh I had heard from her in years. The building I signed my name to in Austin was completed 8 months after my graduation. On the day they installed the lobby plaque, Gishi, I stood in the empty entrance hall and read my name in brushed metal and thought about the girl who had packed hand-me-down linens into a suitcase and decided that permanence was worth building even when no one was watching. Especially when no one was watching, because here is what I want to leave you with. Being the dependable one is not a compliment when it is used as a reason not to show up. Being independent is not a character trait when it is assigned to you, so that other people do not have to feel guilty about needing more. Sacrifice that is never acknowledged is not love. It is labor dressed in the language of family. You do not have to make a scene to be seen, but you do have to say the true thing, in the right room, without apology, and then be willing to sit quietly in the silence that follows, and let the truth do its work. I went to my graduation. I walked across that stage. My name was called, and then my brother stole the room. But I got it back. Not with noise, not with cruelty, not with a speech designed to wound. I got it back by standing up at a table 7 days later and saying, plainly and without performance, here is what this family has cost me, and here is where it stops. That was the moment the degree became real, not when they handed me the paper. When I finally used everything I had learned. So I want to ask you something before you go. If you have been the dependable one in your family, the quiet worker, the one they call independent, because it is easier than calling them what they actually mean, Mina. Have you ever said it out loud? Have you ever put the folder on the table and let the numbers speak? And if you haven't yet, what are you still waiting for? Every story we tell here is written with the belief that the people watching deserve to feel recognized, not just entertained. This is a fictional story created for reflection, emotional honesty, and the hope that somewhere someone hears it and finally gives themselves permission to say the thing they have been carrying alone.